Welcome to the Crit House, everybody. I'm Jeff Larson, and I have to say I am very excited about the show that we have this week. I've been looking forward to this since we first started talking about it. We have some very esteemed participants, reviewers. Sean Tucker, who is here on the lower left, is a photographer and a filmmaker, and now he is also an author of his book titled The Meaning in the Making. He has a highly successful YouTube channel that is really an inspiration to photographers around the world, and I have to say, an inspiration to me as well. Sean Tucker, thank you so much for joining us here on the Crit House.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, sure. Also with us reviewing images today is Alex Kilbee, who is another YouTuber, and his channel has been growing exponentially over the last few years. He has been a professional photographer, so going on 30 years, I believe. Alex's channel is called the Photographic Eye, and it provides a lesson in learning how to speak visually through photography. And Alex Kilbee, thank you for joining us also on the Crit House.
Thanks ever so much, Jeff.
Our photographer today is in Germany. We have it. This is an international program this week. Alexander Rossa is with us, and he is a photographer. We're going to show his images. So, Alex, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and the work, and maybe what it is that you're looking to hear from Sean and Alex about, and what you're trying to learn.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to your show. And I'm Alex. I'm 40 years old. I'm living near Berlin here in Germany. And yeah, I'm photographing since 8 years. And I hope the professional guys have some good advices for me to be on another level for photographing. So I have no particular, no special goal. I'm go out shooting the people on the streets and playing with light and shadows, and yeah, it's always fun for me every time I go out. And yeah, I will documentary the streets in the cities where I'm going to, and yeah, hope for good advices. Yeah.
So, Alex, let me ask you a question before we get into the review. Do you have a goal for what it is you want your photography to be? Are you looking to maybe do a book, or so? Where are you trying to go with it, do you think?
Yeah, I have some prints I sold. Yeah, and I have a small exhibition in Frankfurt, Germany. And yeah, and that was very luck. It was luck. A good friend asked me, and I said yes, no problem, I can do that. So yeah, but it's not the goal to be famous or something else. It's just fun for me. Yeah, to documentary the world outside, what's going on outside, and my point. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. So, Sean, let's start with you, because here's a photographer who's focusing on light and shadow, and that's kind of in your one of your interest areas, I think. Is that what do you think about the work we're seeing, and what advice do you have for Alex?
Can I ask Alex some questions just to kind of get more of a sense? So, like, what is it that what are you looking for when you go out? What grabs you? Is it because I can see a lot of these images, you are definitely, it's about the shadows that's drawing you, but then there's also images here which I feel like I could split this set into two. That there's like the human interest people stuff in here, and then there's like the more graphical shape shadow stuff you're doing. Like, what are you kind of out there looking for when you're out?
Yeah, special moments or special people, yeah, good dressed, or yeah, the mood, a special mood I will capture. Yeah.
And how long have you been doing this?
Street photography for about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
yeah. No, go.
No. I'm very inspired of the movie from Vivian Maier, and I saw it, and I thought, okay, that's my that's the thing I will do. So, but I don't focus on this thematic. So I will play with shadows and light also, and I think there are some selfies. Yeah, the mood, what's going on in the streets, and the soul of the city I will try to capture. So, yeah, that's right.
I mean, my gut response, and this isn't a criticism, because I put myself in the category I'm about to put you in, is I think you're still trying to work out what you want to shoot, is my gut sense. Like, I think you're looking for a direction in what you're shooting. And I'll be super honest with you, like the stuff I post to Instagram, you know, week in and week out at the moment, have done for a few years now, is me playing as well and trying to work out which direction I want to go. So we're at the same spot in this, in that we're trying to work out what interests us. But I think what's going to get interesting for you is when you start to kind of, and not that you stop experimenting the way you are, because I think we should always be experimenting, but where you pick one of these things that you do and really kind of dig in on that and start to create a bit of a style and a focus for yourself, I think is going to be really cool. Like, the stuff I like is that there's a nice consistency in your use of contrast through the lot. So it feels, even though the subject matter is quite varied, it feels like a set. So I'm not sure how you're processing your work, whether it's kind of you're using picture profiles out of camera, or you're processing in Lightroom, or however you're doing stuff. But like, there is a nice consistency, especially in the kind of very rich blacks, I think is quite cool. Something to think about, and this is a super subjective preference, so take this with a massive pinch of salt, is for me, I'm always very wary of blowing highlights. There's a lot of blown highlights in your work, which isn't necessarily a problem if you're doing it on purpose, but which shot is it? If you go to shot 3 on there, for me, she's the feature of that shot. She's the focus, but I can't see any detail in her shirt or her jersey. And I'm gonna guess that what you did here is you darkened down those shadows in post. So what I'd say is start to get like very deliberate about your exposure control, because if you exposed for her top so that you still had detail in, but it was still nice and bright, those shadows would have gone very dark on their own, and you would have had to do less editing in the first place. But you're preserving, because she's your subject, but there's a lot of her missing because the detail's gone. So again, like starting to, do you shoot manual? Do you shoot aperture priority? How do you kind of expose?
Manual and a bit automatic. So I use a rangefinder, yeah, and
right. Yeah, so I would suggest either starting to work out like your manual exposure, really dig in on that and see if you can't like get that subject exposed correctly and let everything else fall dark in the frame, because that's the style you're going for here. You're going for like a Fanho Ray Metzger vibe. So make sure your subject's well exposed with lots of detail, and then let everything else fall dark. And if you are shooting auto, just exposure compensation, just kick it down a couple of stops. So you're making sure you've got that. And then in post, you can tweak it with the raw file slightly and make sure you've got all that lovely detail in her. So there's a couple of instances, you're blowing a lot of skies. That's not necessarily an issue. Like if that's what you're choosing to do, it's fine. But on this one, for example, it's kind of wrapping around his face where you've lost his skin as well. It's disappeared. So like really watching that exposure and making sure that you're trying to keep all the detail, at least on your subject. And if you're blowing highlights, you're doing it on purpose and creating like white negative space, for example, is like a creative choice.
Alex Kilbee, you come from a non-street background, a portraiture background. When you look at these images, and I know you know a lot about the history of photography and other great photographers, what's your reaction to the work?
It's interesting. You know, obviously we were talking earlier before we came on camera about sort of similar opinions, but oppositions. The thing that sort of initially leaps out when we look at this body of Alexander. Do you prefer Alex or Alexander?
Alex.
Alex, okay, so two Alexes.
Dueling Alexes.
Yeah, as sort of Sean alluded to, there's two very distinct areas in this folio. There are the strong graphic ones, such as the number 3, number 7 as well, which for me sort of reminds me a little bit of sort of Joel Merowitz, but and number 8 as well, which has a bit of a so it's a little bit reminiscent of Alex Webb. But then you go to say number 10. Right, so you've got these two people walking down the street, and number 6 especially. These images feel they are just like grab shots. There's nothing much to them. They're kind of like a lightweight nothing. You know, you've been drawn to something, the person was interesting or something like that, and you really kind of just gone. I think what's happened, you've fallen back into this mode of what you were when you first started doing street photography, which is just reacting to things, and something was vaguely interesting you shot. Whereas with these images that you have here, you are beginning to photograph with purpose and with intent. You're actually seeing a scene, you're seeing something play out. And I just feel that, you know, like Sean was sort of saying about, you know, you guys finding, you're searching for your voice. And here is a good example that Jeff has just brought up. This is one of those moments where you have recognized there is something going on here. There is something interesting about this scene, but I don't feel that you have kind of like spent enough time with it. Right now, obviously you've got that cyclist passing by, but I would imagine there would be other cyclists from time to time. Is that if you kind of thought about this particular layout, what is it about this image that you particularly were drawn to when you photographed it?
Well, I thought mankind and the city behind, so it's the language, to speak. So how can I say
the juxtaposition? Is that the word you're looking for?
Composition to the man in front of, and
okay.
So telling, and moving on. So the deep sun and so on. I thought it's tells no story at all. So it's just a nice picture. So yeah.
Because when I sort of see this, and I think you know, Sean mentioned about, you know, the burnout stuff. I think in this case you're okay with it because the nature of the scene lends itself to this very contrasty, very inky black, you know, blown out white. But I see this wonderful shadow being cast by the cyclist, and there's all this stuff on the edge of the frame that's not helping at all. It's not doing anything, right? So you've kind of, I don't think it's good that you've recognized this idea and this interplay, this juxtaposition of man with the city, and this is a lovely scene. But I just feel if you've taken a step to your left, so you see that kind of street sign with the arrow, right? That you moved it around a little bit, so you're kind of compressing the frame. So instead of you having like this, you would then have it more like that. So you could then really draw the eye into that sort of thing. But I think, you know, there's elements here where you're certainly on the right path. I know I would like to see some of these in color. I don't know if black and white is the style that you go for.
I have a monochrome camera, so it's not possible.
So pay a bit extra and get the color bit. But you know, I think that there's some lovely stuff in here. But just be mindful of. Could you go to number 4, please, Jeff?
I can.
Yeah, this isn't. I just sorry to say this has no place in this folio. There's nothing in this picture. There's an expression on this. I think I can't see very well, but I think it's a gentleman there. It's interesting, but it's not at the same level as some of the other pictures in your folio here. And that this, you know, it just feels like you're kind of, yeah, you're reacting to something and just kind of taking a snapshot in the broader sense of the word.
More hip shot, yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of thing. If the whole folio was full of this, then I think, you know, then you sort of go, well, it's a thing. But the fact that there are peppered throughout here images that are, even at this size, because I'm sort of seeing a lot of these as thumbnails that are quite small, even at that size have an impact. And that's a really strong thing. Like this, I think you could probably have pushed it a little bit further. I know that maybe you know, she might get a little bit, oh, you're taking a picture of my bum. You know, but there is, I think there's more here that you can play with. But I'm glad to see that you're seeing beyond the obvious for the most part.
Sean, your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think your light shadow play is your stronger work right now where you're at. I think as Alex said, I have to agree. Your people stuff is reactive, but I don't think you've worked out. I mean, honestly, I'm not really a street people photographer. I don't really know how to do it very well. But my friends who do that stuff very well, they spend hours watching a space and watching how people are interacting with each other and patterns. It's not a case of reacting just because someone has a nice hat or a coat, because it doesn't really say anything. So they walk the same. I'll give you an example. So my friend Joshua Jackson, if you've heard of his work before, he just put out a book last year called Sleepless in Soho, and he walked it. The whole book is basically 4 streets in one little block, city block in Chinatown. And he produced a book by walking those 4 streets every day for 2 years. And he knew those streets, he knew the people who were there, he knew the rhythms, and he got to know how people interacted with each other. And I think that's how he came up with such strong people photography. So I reckon if you want to go that route, it's great. And I think you're starting to notice things, which is definitely the right way to go. But I think you've got a lot of work to do in terms of just going beyond scratching the surface, like digging a bit deeper and looking for those proper interactions, and go and find those street photographers you respect, you know, whoever they might be, who do that people stuff, and listen to interviews about why they think the way they do, the amount of time they spend on the street. I mean, Alex mentioned Joel Meyerowitz, you know, people like that, or Gary Winogrand, who would spend hours and hours and hours every day in that space. Learning.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you there for a second, Sean? Yeah. I think you've touched on something that you know, a lot of people are probably never really give much thought to, is that when thinking about the photographers of the present day who are producing good street photography and certainly, you know, the greats of the past, there's a tendency to think that they just wander around aimlessly and these shots just happen. Yeah. That there's a magic that they get. And of course, the reality is, as you've said, that they are in a space. You've mentioned the ebb and the flow of the city, of the place that they're in, is that they are being in tune with that. And that's, I think, an important lesson. So I sort of think that it's worth, you know, reiterating, is that Alex, you're beginning to get into that ebb and flow. Find places that interest you, like a stage, right? Okay. And then see what players come across that stage. Don't go randomly walking around looking for the players. Find a place where those players, but you like the bicycle shot, right? The number 8. There's a stage there for a story to happen on, and you're starting to get that. Yeah, sorry, Sean.
No, it's good. I mean, your work is good, but like I think, like I said, the graphical shape stuff, I think you've already started to develop something there, and keep digging. The people stuff, I think you're going to need to just learn, you know, patience and how to dig deeper. So if you find a spot where there's something that interesting that's happening, I would suggest revisit that spot 100 times rather than try and find a different area every time you go out, and try and get deep below the surface to work out what's going on would be what I'd suggest. Yeah, but I mean, you're on your way, and be kind to yourself. Like, I mean, there's, you know, you're 5 years in. Honestly, that's nothing. You know, you've already on it, you're probably further than I was 5 years in. So keep cracking on, but just push yourself to dig deeper rather than spread wider. This is the problem with the social media age. I think we're looking for a shot that we can quickly take and post somewhere that impresses people and get a like, and we feel good about ourselves, instead of saying, actually, maybe I should go and visit that one spot 100 times and take 100 photographs. I can't post all those because it's the same spot, but I'm going to deepen as a photographer much quicker because I'm going for depth rather than breadth, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think, earlier you mentioned Fan Ho, and there are different much echoes of Fan Ho in here, and I think, Alex, what would be a handy exercise for you is to, when you walk around, just in your day-to-day, doing your life, have a notepad with you or something like a little book that you could write a note in and say, I really like this particular scene. It's like Fan Ho knew Hong Kong, and he must have known the places and how they look at different times of days. So if you think about all those stairwells with the light coming down, that's not accident, man. That's because he knows that at 4:15, that on such and such a day, the light's going to be like this. And do you know what? At 4:25, the subway train spits out people. It's that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So Sean had mentioned earlier the project in Soho that I think is interesting, because that puts that concept of putting a limitation on your work, I think has always been something that resonated with me, and saying this is, and that's one of the things about doing a project. It puts a limitation because you're shooting this. And if you're shooting Soho in a 4-block area, then that puts a limitation. And it seems like one of the things that street photographers often do is they just go, they just go at sort of random, and they take, and they're not thoughtful and directive. Not to say that, Alex, that's the case with you, but it would be interesting to sort of see you put a limitation and say, not all the time, but this is what I'm going to shoot, and this is my area of focus, and then you just focus on that.
So that's why I decided to shoot only black and white and buy only monochrome cameras. So the limitation,
I think that's good, but don't miss the geographical limitation, because that's kind of a stylistic choice. But I learned this recently looking at Alex Soth's Magnum course, which is really good, about sort of photographic storytelling. And often we've got the camera. So say you've chosen your monochrome camera, you know you want to shoot in black and white. That's fine. But now you go, what do I point it at? And then you just go out and point at everything, hoping that something hits. Is probably not going to happen. But what he does is he says, like his sleeping in the Mississippi project, he basically said, I'm going to travel from up in, I think it was Minnesota where he was, all the way down the Mississippi River to Louisiana or wherever it ends up. And he wasn't allowed to shoot anything more than 100 meters away from the river. That's the geographical limitation he gave himself. And then he shot in that space, and a theme started to emerge of sleeping. So there was an old discarded mattress and a dream catcher and a tree. And that's how Sleeping by the Mississippi came out, because of the geographical limitation.
Yeah.
Because you've got your camera, but I can see now you're trying to work out what to point it at. And I think give yourself a small area to work, and that will come out. Something that really interests you, and dig deep.
But something on in that kind of theme, but it's slightly different from a geographic idea, is that you earlier when we were talking about the image of the gent on the bicycle on the bridge, you talked about the interplay between human and the city, right? Yeah. And you can also look at that. You can say, well, this is going to be my scope for what I'm going to photograph today, is images where we can see man's impact, or not man's impact, rather man's insignificance when as part of the city. So if you look at the ones that are shown, number 3, this is so number 3 definitely kind of falls into that sort of vibe. The city is overpowering the person, it's making the person insignificant. Number 8, people being shadows, obviously. It's a theme. Number 12 sort of is on the border with that, where the city. So if you start thinking about sort of images that have a kind of a more of a thematic sense to them, then I think it gives you a little bit more purpose. As Shaw says, it's kind of two sides of the same coin, really. You know, the other geographic thing or this, but you would definitely benefit, I think, from being a little bit more purposeful about images.
I think that's right. Alex Rossa, any last thoughts before we wrap up in terms of what they've said? Anything that you just absolutely disagree with, or something that that you?
I'm totally agree, and it's very helpful to for a good advice. So I think it makes sense to focus on one theme and make a small space to look for it in the city, and focus on that point. So it's that's.
And by the way, go ahead, Alex. Sorry, Alex. Go ahead.
I was going to say just very quickly, because I don't think I mentioned it. Alex, if you're not familiar with Alex Webb, I think you might like his work with light and shadow, although he's predominantly a color photographer. But I think the layering in his images with the use of shadow and light is also worth. I think you would benefit greatly from looking at his work.
Brilliant work. Great suggestion. Alex Rossa, thank you so much for sharing your work here on the Crit House. I know how hard it is to put yourself out there for comment and review and criticism. So it's greatly appreciated, and it's especially hard to do now that it's out in the whole world for YouTube to take a look at as well. I would like to encourage all of the viewers to help Alex out. Put your comments into the comments section so that he gets some more information. If you agree or disagree with the comments that are made here, please keep the comments going right there. If you are interested in participating in the Crit House, please find the link below and perhaps receive a critique from our panel of experts here. We've had some great people on, including the folks we have here today. Thank you, Sean Tucker and Alex Kilbee. Really, it's an honor for us to have you on this tiny little program that's just started off. And thank you so much. We will be linking to a couple of videos out there of Sean. Sean's video will be how to get good feedback on your photography, which I think is sort of fitting for what we're doing here. And we'll be linking out to a video from Alex on the visual language of photography, what photo school should have taught photographers, for many of us who never went to photo school. So thank you all for joining us, and thanks for watching the Crit House.